So today I want to talk about the drama that's been going on with the channel What's the Dirt? The blowback, I should say, that he received from his most recent lyric breakdown of Drake's Family Matters. So for those of you who don't know, there's this YouTube channel called What's the Dirt? This guy who's breaking down various rap songs. It's gotten a lot of attention as of recently for really in-depth analysis of lyrics, obviously with the whole Kendrick and Drake beef, he was really on top of that and doing these really long form videos. And they got a lot of, positive feedback and, cool, good for him. In his video on Family Matters, there was some analysis that I would call just not very good. Just not very good. So What's the Dirt stated was, in the song, Drake says the N-word 37 times, and he claims that the use of the N-word 37 times is referring to Drake's age. I'll play a little bit of a clip here.
And what's also really clever here is that Drake is 37 years old, and he says the N-word 37 times on this track. And I believe his reasons for doing this is he's basically saying the word for every year that he's been alive to symbolize that he was indeed born black. And look, I know this is all about culture and not really about race, but no matter how you spin it, a lot of the themes that Kendrick uses in his own music, Drake's family also went through, and that is his heritage. I went through his dad's entire genealogy. His family's from the deep south, right? They were indeed enslaved. They really had it bad, and you can't remove that blood from Drake. So a lot of the things that Kendrick talks about is also Drake's heritage, and you can't take that away.
What the fuck are you talking about?
And throughout that statement, he made a lot of assumptions about black culture, and a lot of people had problems with that, and rightfully so. Now, this came to my attention through Open Mike Eagle's YouTube channel that I've been following for a while. He made a video on it, but also Justin Hunte was another major critic.
Hi there, Editing Zach here. I didn't go into detail about all the things that Matt from What's the Dirt said about Justin Hunte and stuff. I didn't go into that detail. That's not really what this video is about. Is obviously what Matt said was super fucking shitty. But Justin Hunte on The Company Man, he just made a response video recently as I'm editing this. I just noticed. And they've addressed their own drama, and they've worked it out on their own. So I just wanted to make that clear, that that's not really the focus of this video, is the personal, shitty things that that Matt said about Justin Hunte, which was absolutely disrespectful, especially to a guy like Justin, that is just one of at least to me, one of the premier sort of faces of hip hop journalism criticism on YouTube. So yeah, anyway, back to the video.
Now, unfortunately, What's the Dirt seemed to have doubled down on Twitter and X and was getting in a lot of arguments. And basically the reason why this is such a problem is because What's the Dirt is Canadian. No, sorry, he's white. And he's making assumptions about black culture that he just wouldn't know. And as someone who is in the adjacent field of academia and teaches and studies and researches and is very much a part of sort of hip-hop education, I thought I'd chime in with some thoughts about this because I think it reveals, if you are white in, hip-hop in some capacity, things you need to be aware of. If we're going to do that, I should say a bit more about myself and where I'm coming from as a hip-hop sort of scholar, as a practitioner, as we say in academia. I think I should maybe talk a little bit about where I'm coming from so that you get a sense of the experiences that I've had. So, hi there. My name is Zachary Diaz. I'm a recent PhD graduate at the University of Bristol on music. I wrote a PhD dissertation and master's dissertation on the music of hip-hop producer Jay Dilla. I am also a hip-hop producer. I've released multiple instrumental albums. I've also been a journalist and podcaster in the world of hip-hop. So for a couple of years, I was the co-host of a podcast called Kick Knowledge with my friend Steven Gilbers, in which we interviewed many hip-hop figures such as Large Professor, Raka of Dilated Peoples, and Eric Sermon. And through both my academic research and through my own personal, involvement with, local music scenes, I've been involved both in academic and non-academic settings related to hip-hop studies, hip-hop education. I've been heavily involved with the European Hip-Hop Studies Network. I've been to a couple of their conferences, I've spoken at a couple of their conferences, and this is something that I'm very passionate about. But also, I'm white. A bit of background of kind of how I got into hip-hop research. For a long time, I didn't really even know it was like a thing. I grew up, listening to hip-hop, but really only kind of not really participating in it as a culture, because I grew up in the suburbs outside of Dallas. It was very upper class. It was very white. Lots of new homes and, families making good money, and it was very conservative. And hip-hop culture didn't really exist where I came from. And I totally admit that. Hip-hop was just kind of this cool thing that I found on the internet. It was this thing that I participated in, but only not really in my daily life. And it really wasn't until I started university that I started getting into hip-hop more and more as a fan, as someone who wanted to write about hip-hop. I was also doing a music degree at the same time, and I was a little bit disillusioned with my studies. I was taking music history, I was taking music theory, but I was also listening to a lot of hip-hop, especially classic hip-hop at the time. I was listening to, getting into the classics of, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, and Beastie Boys, and I had this weird thought of why am I, these are so musically rich and complex, and why don't we learn about this kind of stuff? Why don't people write about this kind of stuff in an academic setting? And I was a little bit disillusioned with that. And then I started talking to my music theory professor about this, and he was like, that's a thing, go do that. I was encouraged by him to start writing on that more. And then I did a couple conferences. There was a hip-hop studies conference at Cambridge, and that opened me up to kind of the wider world of hip-hop studies in an academic setting. That was just totally, it really is like a global thing. There's a journal called the Global Hip Hop Studies Journal, and I think that's something people kind of outside of academia don't realize, is both hip-hop can be an academic sort of area of study, and also it's a global thing. Hip-hop culture itself is a global thing. In terms of my own sort of passion for it, I say personally, as if the academic aspect of it isn't also personal. I started talking to people online, and then, people I met at conferences. I met this guy, Stephen Gilbers, who we started talking about doing some kind of podcast, because we were both super passionate about hip-hop, and when we started this podcast, it was 2017, and Kendrick's Damn just dropped, and the culture was so vibrant, and it was something we really wanted to talk about. We were also two white guys, and we were very aware of that. And we realized that we don't want to put our foot in our mouths. We don't want to look like a bunch of jackasses. And now we were lucky enough to get some interviews with some really massive figures, and I still feel it an immense privilege to be able to get to do that. And I feel like it's an immense privilege to just do this in general. To just talk about, something I'm passionate about in a culture that is so important to both myself and so many people, but also something I want to get across in this video. And if you are white and you're involved in hip-hop in any capacity, it's something I think we need to understand, is that hip-hop, if hip-hop is a big house, right? You are a guest in this house, but you do not own the house, and you do not run the house. The second you start telling people in the house how to run the house, that's not good, and you're gonna get criticism, and it's valid, because you don't run this. You don't, it's not, you may be a part of the culture, but it's not your culture. You don't have the lived experience of the black culture that so much of hip-hop stems from, and that's just something you have to be aware of. And yeah, you're probably gonna slip up and say some dumb shit, but like, you need, you need to apologize and learn from your mistakes and get better. Now, I saw What's the Dirt's apology video. It seems to have really gotten to him, and he's stating that, maybe he doesn't want to do that anymore. I don't think he's like should be canceled entirely. If he can legitimately learn from this, then okay. And that's something that both in, academic settings and in journalistic settings, white writers talk about various topics related to hip-hop. I see them slip up. I'm probably I'm not immune to that either. I've gotten criticized at conferences for speaking about things that maybe I wasn't super familiar with. I did a conference it was a few years ago, and it was just sort of autoethnographic, me talking about me being both a producer and someone who studies hip-hop production. And I was very adamant about emphasizing, this is, inherently Black culture, it's African-American culture, and it's something that, we as scholars need to be aware of. And someone was like, okay, then what are you doing exactly to support that? And it was a little bit, you get nervous when you're in, settings like that, but it kind of made me go maybe take a step back and go, it's an important question to think about of what are you actually doing for the culture that's supporting it? Because if you are supporting it, you can't put yourself at the front of it, because that's not, like I've said before, this is not your culture. It is something that you can write about, it is something that you can participate in, but it just isn't, when it comes to talking about anything related to the lived experiences of Black people, you're not one of those people. And I also see with What's the Dirt, a lot of sort of like white guilt of oh no, I've overstepped and I'm a bad person now. No one's saying you can't listen to this stuff. No one's saying you can't write about this stuff. But it has to be good. It has to be good and well-informed analysis, well-informed breakdowns. If you're just saying shit, then, what are you doing it for? Are you just doing it for clout? Are you just doing it to get attention? That brings into question stuff of are you just using this for cultural appropriation, to sort of gain some sort of social capital? People are going to question you. People are going to question you if you're legit or not. And they're totally valid in doing so. So that's what I'm trying to get across with this video, is just saying it's something that you need to be, I'm just talking to you assuming that whoever's watching this is white. To my fellow white people, if you're involved in hip-hop in any capacity, you just need to be aware of that. Yeah, whether you're writing hip-hop, whether you're making hip-hop, whether you're teaching hip-hop, it doesn't matter what, side of the culture you're coming from. From my perspective, this is something someone told me, especially from the perspective of academia, we're seeing, academia as this ivory tower sort of thing. It's looking at ebony culture from an ivory tower. Academia tends to be seen as that, as this sort of, the apex of scholarship. But because of that, it can also be really disconnected from actual culture that's going on. It simply just observes communities, but it doesn't really, participate in said communities. It doesn't help out said communities. And for me as an academic, it's my goal, one of my main goals in my career is to break that divide. And I think it should kind of be the goal of, related to journalism too. I mean, there's plenty of stuff I've read on the internet of white journalists putting their foot in their mouths when it comes to talking about hip-hop and hip-hop culture. What I want to talk about right now, because it has to do with my own research, is there's an article from The Guardian called The Mozart of Hip-Hop, and it's about Jay Dilla and his influence, and I kind of used it as a talking point in part of my PhD dissertation, and I kind of take issue with that when I hear people saying, oh, Jay Dilla, he's like the Mozart of hip-hop. I mean, obviously, I'm sure Jay Dilla himself would have been flattered. I think a lot of that perspective of seeing Jay Dilla as like the Mozart of hip hop is very much sort of a Eurocentric white perspective. The only way someone could understand a black artist is through sort of a white racial frame, and I take issue with that. Jay Dilla is not the Mozart of hip-hop. Jay Dilla is the Jay Dilla of hip-hop. And you know, Tupac is the Tupac of hip-hop, and Kendrick is the Kendrick of hip-hop. We don't have to compare these figures to Western white European cultural figures in order to make, you know, to make them seem legit in any sort of way. Something both, I think, What's the Dirt and I have in common is this sort of, the background of, you know, being a fan of hip-hop ever since you were young, but living in a sort of white habitus, with habitus meaning not just kind of like habitat, but like, you know, the social world that you kind of live in. Within the context of white habitus, that's going to be white. It's going to be very white. And there's just going to be things culturally that you're just not aware of. So when that like bubble was popped for What's the Dirt, it kind of broke his brain a little bit, because I'm sure he's, like he said before, he's very passionate about this, but he didn't take into consideration his, you know, lack of awareness, and also just like inability to fully understand and talk about things related to the black experience, which the Kendrick and Drake feud featured pretty substantially. You know, they were both criticizing each other for, you know, their expressions of blackness, and that's not something that What's the Dirt can define, and that's not something I could define. Yeah, so that's kind of, I think, the sort of the white habitus, I think that's the problem that I think a lot of white writers, scholars, whoever, within hip-hop, journalism, academia, what have you, need to kind of overcome, is that thinking of, you know, whatever culture and experience you have as like the default, normal, and then everything, and then when you get into hip-hop's, you know, hip-hop spaces, you carry that habitus with you. You carry that experience with you, but it can blind you. It really can, from certain cultural awareness of being able to not only fully participate in hip-hop culture, but also being, you know, able to be fully respected, you know, in hip-hop culture. Because when you have that lack of awareness, people are going to call you out for it, and they should. So yeah, that's just sort of my 2 cents. I know this is a bit of a different video from what I've done previously. I kind of want to get more into talking about, you know, my own background as a hip-hop scholar, and if you enjoy this, please like, please subscribe. I think these conversations are really, that need to be had. I think there are other YouTubers who don't look like me, who are probably much more qualified and much better at talking about this, and I encourage you to go watch their videos as well. You know, FD Signifier, I feel like, is making some of the best content on this website. I genuinely do. He's absolutely brilliant, especially when it comes to talking about hip-hop culture and, you know, history and all that. But yeah, it's just something I kind of wanted to chime in, put in my thoughts about this. But yeah, thanks for watching.